Thanks, Peter, for inviting the bank. I thought I couldn't get any worse after Gil, but then with all these beautiful drawings and talking about beauty, I ask you to bear with me because I'm going to talk about poverty, inequality, a much darker picture in the cities of Latin America. So, I work for the World Bank, and our goal is a world without poverty. There are two goals for 2030, and it's to finish with extreme poverty and to raise the shared prosperity of the bottom 40% in developing countries. And the topic of urban areas is key because that's actually where prosperity happens. That's where growth concentrates. I'm going to talk to you about some of the projects and analytic work that we are carrying in the region of Latin America. I'll go through the challenges that we're facing in the cities at a glance, and then I'll tell you a little bit about some of the solutions that we are developing with the client, with our partners, the governments, and the constituencies at the cities and countries where we're working. So, LAC is the second most urbanized region of the world, right after North America. It's home to four mega cities in the world: Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, Mexico, and Bogota and Lima will become mega cities by 2030. 80% of the population today in Latin America live in urban areas, and by 2050 it's expected to raise to 86%. But it is also a very heterogeneous region with different levels of urbanization if we look at sub-regional patterns. We also see that from 60 to 70% of the gross domestic product of growth is generated in urban areas. So getting it right in terms of how these cities operate, they function, is absolutely key to promote growth and reduce poverty. The annual production of the 40 largest cities in LAC exceed $842 billion, which is approximately 1/3 of the region GDP. And 70% of the urban population work in the service sector, while only 24% works for the industry sector, which shows that the service sector is the main economic driver in cities in Latin America. But one of the challenges that we face here is also the predominance of the informal sector and the fundamental role that it plays in the economy of cities in LAC. The other key challenge that we're facing, as I said, is urban poverty, with 124 million urban inhabitants in LAC living in urban areas, living under the line of poverty, with a very high proportion of these urban poor living in slums, informal settlements, huge housing deficits. It has increased from 38 million to 42 to 51 million between 1990 and 2011, and it keeps growing. Governments haven't been successful at finding a solution to housing deficit. And another of the challenges that we're facing is, as I said, how the differences, how these challenges change or vary from country to country. We see countries like Chile and Costa Rica, where only 10% of the urban population live in slums, to cities in Bolivia that house 48% of the population living in slums. Then, at the heart of poverty and underdevelopment, there's the issue of inequality, which at the end destroys the capacity of building social capital in our countries. LAC is the most unequal region in the world. The average Gini coefficient for LAC has been the highest in the world since 1970. And even with the increase in the middle class in the last decade, this trend hasn't been reversed. Afro-descendants, and here I'm concentrating on social inequality, on issues of race and gender. Afro-descendants represent about 50% of the poor in the region, when they're only 1/3 of the total population. And the welfare gap between indigenous groups and non-indigenous groups is increasing in most countries. Lack of accessibility to employment opportunities, lack of access to goods and services, inequality in income distribution, inequality in access to housing. A fourth challenge that I wanted to mention is that of crime and violence in the region, which is at epidemic levels in 75% of the region. And crime and violence threatens, in particular, the urban poor and the youth. So this is a huge challenge for policymakers and planners in urban areas in Latin American cities. And if we look at economic and social development, the reality is that crime and violence diverts key resources from development policies that because they are put into fighting crime and violence. Just to mention an example, in Central America, crime and violence accounts for an average of 7.7% of the GDP. Of the GDP loss in that region. And finally, I wanted also to refer to the risks of the challenge of natural disasters in urban agglomerations in the region. LAC has 9 of the top 20 countries ranked by economic losses due to extreme weather events over the past 20 years. Disaster events in LAC are increasing, as are disaster losses, and damages accounted for 50 billion between 2001 and 2010, when almost 600 disaster events took place. And with the challenge of climate change, this problem is becoming more and more serious and increasing, both in intensity and in the number of events per year. So rounding up the issues of challenges, I wanted to refer in particular to the challenge of urban exclusion in Latin American cities, and to the different forms that it takes to then pass on to some of the solutions that we're working on with counterparts in municipal governments in the cities of Latin America. So I'll refer to solutions that try to address the challenge of physical, spatial exclusion, economic exclusion, access to jobs, access to an education that can give better opportunities to the most vulnerable in our communities to get better jobs, and social exclusion, which has to do with the notion of becoming a true citizen in the community where you live, having the opportunity to give your children access to schools, access to health centers, access to mobility, access to beautiful streets, to parks, to a better quality of life. And that's at the heart of the challenges that cities in Latin America are facing, because there's huge disparity between those that do have access to beautiful streets, like the streets in Puerto Madero in Buenos Aires, and the citizens that do not feel like citizens and cannot even access the social and political process of a city because they live in slums right across the street or very near to those rich and beautiful areas like Villa 31 in Buenos Aires. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the things and the activities and interventions that we've been developing in the investment operations and the analytic work that the World Bank is doing in the region of Latin America. And I'll refer to 3 tools or topics: urban amenities, sustainable mobility solutions, and the use of new technologies to build up smarter cities. The framework within which we work in the design of these operations is that of promoting green and inclusive growth, clean, efficient, and resilient cities, but having the main focus on inclusiveness. So in terms of urban amenities, these should be considered at the heart of any urban development project, and that's how we view it when working on urban development projects at the bank. As cities urbanize and densify, you need to ensure areas for recreation, areas where communities can be built and strengthened. Definitely, absolute sprawl is not the solution, but neither is concrete jungles. The other key notion here, message, is that urban amenities shouldn't be conceived as an afterthought, that it's much more expensive to redesign or put them in place after basic infrastructure has been built, that it has to become at the early stages of the planning processes. Another key aspect is that they can work both ways. They can reinforce exclusion when you have these fancy museums and high-tech areas to attract the younger generations. If you don't think about inclusion when designing those, then you risk going for gentrification, and that's what we want to avoid in Latin American cities as they start thinking about you, or when they start using these tools, and that they are indeed key to make agglomeration work. These are some examples of some of the projects that the bank has financed, like the linear park in Aguascalientes, Mexico, mobile museums, libraries in cities in Mexico and Ecuador, high-tech or innovation, knowledge, community development spaces, spaces for social interaction and creativity, creative integration. But to design exactly what type of urban amenities you need to know the local needs of that city. To know the local needs of that city, you need data. And I wanted to show you also some of the activities that are included in the projects of urban development, such as, for example, the Jamaica Crime Observatory that uses new technologies to identify the crime and violence challenges in the cities, to respond with the design of urban amenities, taking into consideration those realities. With the georeferencing of crime and violence facts, we look at the type of urban amenities that can mitigate the risks of violence and help through the crime prevention through environmental design methodology. This is another example of that, and it's an urban development project in Honduras where to reduce certain types of crime and to enhance the perception of safety, the project included urban amenities that were designed on the basis of data on crime and violence. The emphasis was placed in bringing together both the delivery of physical infrastructure and social interventions, activities aimed at strengthening the links and organizational structures of the communities where this physical infrastructure was being built. And another key aspect of that was placing the municipalities in the driver's seat and strengthening their technical capacities, because that's when we look at the developments in European cities and we try to bring those best practices to cities in Latin America or in other developing regions. One of the key challenges that are faced by these cities and by policymakers in these cities is the lack of technical capacities in municipal teams. So that's also part of these engagements. So infrastructure going along with sports and educational programs, environmental programs with young people, strengthening community links, community organizations, working on issues of violence, gender, race, promoting social inclusion. I'll move very fast now. Oh, just 1 minute then. We're in trouble. I just wanted to refer quickly to sustainable mobility activities. Here I'm presenting the challenges in the urban transport sector, more congestion, low quality in public transit services, pollution, increasing rates of motorization. And the key message here is one of convergence of agendas. It's about sustainable mobility. It's about safer mobility, road accidents being the #1 killer of young people in Latin America and in other developing regions, with fatalities increasing in urban areas, a more competitive, efficient, healthy mobility, universal, affordable, taking into consideration the needs of the most vulnerable groups. Green mobility, equity in the use of public space being at the heart of these projects, using the push and pull approaches. These are some of the examples, the projects in Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, working on smart cards, multi-transfer, and working on the multimodal city, the intersection of the different modes of transport and facilitating that intersection, universal access, planning, strengthening the planning capabilities of municipal governments. These are the technical and operational dimensions that are at the heart of these operations, a holistic approach to road safety, fostering the use of ICT for planning, management, monitoring, and evaluation, the use of big data and crowdsourcing, the emphasis on non-motorized transport and universal access. A perfect example of this is Bogota with Transmilenio, and that graph shows how the lower income population were the ones that benefited the most in the travel time savings with Transmilenio, and the design of bike lanes that linked Transmilenio to low-income neighborhoods with bike lanes.
Veronica, I have a question.
Okay.
What is it
Just
that
to
you
round up,
really want to tell us in a summary?
Okay.
Go for it.
I'll go for it. So, cities are fundamental for promoting growth. That's where prosperity happens in developing countries. You need sustainable mobility. You need to think about inclusion when designing and planning urban interventions. And in the 21st century, smart cities, new technologies will be at the heart. That's a key aspect of what we are doing.
All right. And I have one more question for you, and no more slides, just for this question, because I'm really curious. So you were talking about investing in cities, making them more inclusive. With the World Bank, how much money are they putting into Latin America in terms of this particular challenge? How much?
Billions of dollars.
Billions, how
many? The metros in Quito, Lima, Bogota, Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, BRTs in Buenos Aires, in the cities of interior of Argentina, the environmental degradation projects, flooding, the Maldonado, the Vega in Buenos Aires, disaster risk management in Central America, urban development, billions of dollars.
I loved your presentation. Take a seat.
Yeah, thank you.